Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network, where we go through the A24 back catalogue and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. In this episode, we finally get the chance to review The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer and based on the novel by Martin Amis. So, Dallas, we have very rarely ever get A24 hour news just in time for us to record. It always seems to drop afterwards. But Variety randomly dropped an interesting article today with Martin Scorsese and his terminally online daughter, Francesca, and they revealed that they're writing a book for A24. Not really much said about the book, but she's writing a book with her father, and they're making a short film as well. So what could they be making a book about? Any ideas, Dallas?
Well, if it was the history of A24 over the last sort of 10, 11 years, I was hoping that A24 would have come to us to write about it. I mean, we've reviewed pretty much every film, we've discussed every aspect of A24. Who better to write the official history of A24 than us two? But I mean, I can only assume it's sort of part love story to the history of cinema and the preservation of 35mm mixed with what on earth a TikTok is.
I know. One day when we ever run out of A24 films again, we'll just have to do an A24 book club to see what when that comes out. But yeah, very curious to see what that one will be. The man certainly never takes a break, so I imagine he'll be doing this between his Oscar campaigning and his Jesus film.
Hey, look, if it brings the Scorseses into the fold of A24, I'm all for it.
Yeah, a wee change from his producing films. Where what was that one? There was the Green Dragon. That was one, and then you've got the souvenir films on the more classier side. So he certainly popped up here and there. I guess Good Time and Uncut Gems were produced as well. But yeah, quite curious to see when we get. This will be the closest we get to something like out and out his.
Yeah, it depends. I'm just now wondering what type of book it'd be. If it's anything like the screenplays, I know that that's going to cause an issue in terms of the shipping costs. So, if it could be a nice paperback edition, Marty, that would be helpful for the for the costs.
Absolutely. Well, we've waited a while to review this film, and it's only really got a bit of a huge rollout in America in the past week or so. But The Zone of Interest is finally here as well. So, obviously, as I mentioned, based on the book by Martin Amis, Auschwitz commandant Rudolf Höss and his wife Hedwig strive to build a dream life for their family in a house and garden beside the camp. So, Dallas, we've mentioned many a time, and over the 10 years plus of A24, nearly 150 odd films, Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin is still, I think it's safe to say, both of our favourite A24 films. So, talk me through it. How excited for this film were you, and what was your initial reaction?
Well, I mean, yeah, Under the Skin, one of my all-time A24 films, but probably one of my favorite films of this century. Not quite last decade, because we moved into the 2020s now, but he's a rare talent in that he's a fantastic director, but also rare in the length of time between projects. His last film was sort of Under the Skin, and that was 2013, 2014, and then you had before that sort of Birth was, I think, around about sort of 2008, 2009, and then Sexy Beast, about another 8 years before that. So you do have to wait for a while for a Jonathan Glazer film, but you always can hope and expect that you're going to get something really good. And I saw this at a BAFTA screening, I think, back in November. And, I was just, really excited to see it. Wasn't really sure. I know that it was adapted from, well, again, this is one of those Jonathan Glazer things where you say, Under the Skin was technically adapted from the Michael Rosen novel, but I think it's basically very loosely sort of taken the very sort of core element and sort of expanded it into something of his own. And yeah, I mean, I was sort of blown away by the power of this film. We'll get into it, but it's a very, you don't see much in terms of the horror but I think you are still blown away by the power of the film, and it provokes a lot of questions, I think, and that is something which cinema should be doing, especially at times like this where there's so much going on in the world about what you choose to watch, choose to ignore, choose to take part in, and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I think it's a film which it seems to be, reminds of, it was basically released around here in the UK around the sort of time of Holocaust Memorial Day. So it's a chance to sort of reflect on the horrors of the past, but also make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. So yeah, no, very, very impressed by this one.
Yeah, likewise. I think some of these projects, we've been doing this podcast so long. I remember when we spoke about there's going to be a new Jonathan Glazer film and it's going to be called The Zone of Interest, and a good couple of years back, and it immediately put this to being one of my most anticipated films of whatever year it came out, and just something I've been looking forward to for a long, long time. And I managed to successfully avoid the trailer. I think it helped that the trailer is just a mixture of audio and Mika Levy's score, so there was a couple of times it was just about to start playing and I was able to just sort of put my head down and just really concentrate and try and drown it out. But it meant that I went into the film only seeing maybe the odd average screenshot and so on of someone in the garden. And I think a tweet that I saw around the time of the Cannes kind of reviews dropping where it was like, it's like a Nazi Big Brother. And I was like, wow, I'm really, really interested in this kind of concept and so on. So yeah, I was really, really looking forward to it. But one of those films that seemed to evade me for several months. I forgot to renew my BAFTA membership. I didn't get the chance to go to the London Film Festival this year. It wasn't one of the films that got to be part of the London Film Festival tour and so on. So yeah, it was one of those films where I was desperate to see it. Again, I think, as you say, Jonathan Glazer films really come out. You think of Sexy Beast coming out, 2000, 2001, and then in that time we've now hit the fourth film as well. So there's an element where, like some of my favorite film directors, where the lack of films make every one of them a special event release. So couldn't wait for this one, and I went along to a really busy Saturday night Cineworld preview, and it was one of those ones I was a bit wary of it because it tends to be a bit of a Joe Public crowd, how they're going to behave, how they're going to respond, and you could kind of hear a pin drop during the whole film. So it was a really great experience within the cinema as well, and a bit of a relief. So yeah, I think from the turnaround from seeing that film to then all the Oscar nominations coming out, I couldn't have been happier for Jonathan Glazer, and it's great to see the film has actually broken out to that, because I did not expect, even until the Oscars themselves, maybe you with your kind of Academy Awards nose would have maybe got a hint that this was coming, but I was so surprised to see it. And even when I was watching it live and it was like Best International Film, Zone of Interest, you're like, no chance it's making the top 10 for Best Picture, and there it was. So I've been really excited to see the journey this film's been going on with its wider release.
Yeah, no, it's a very pleasant surprise it made the top 10. I mean, I think everyone was. It was. I don't know if maybe it's the Academy sort of over the last couple of years sort of widening out the membership or whatever. But two foreign language films. Well, two and a half actually, if you include Past Lives as well. But Anatomy of a Fall and Zone of Interest got into the Best Picture lineup, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's a great sort of step forward. And I mean, I know that I was lucky enough to see the BAFTA screening, and then I obviously didn't give away any spoilers and stuff like that. But the only thing I was basically said, is make sure you see it in a cinema. If you get the chance to get a screener of it and watch it on a laptop, it's not going to have the same impact. And a huge amount of that is down to the fantastic work on the score by Mika Levy, but also the general sound design. And it's my personal pick to win at the Oscars in the best sound. Best sound normally goes to like these action blockbusters with all the sound mixing of all the different elements. But I think the sound design in this film is hugely important in sort of hitting you with the true power of the film, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, Dallas, the one thing that I must admit, as I mentioned, I went into this as blind as I possibly could. And while watching this film, while everyone knows Auschwitz was real. People worked there. I was unsure about this family, whether this was an element of, I think the book, if I'm correct, tends to go by, it's a bit more of a fictional family, whereas this is actually based on a real family, the Hosses. I didn't realise that until afterwards, and there's a really good documentary on the BBC about sort of Rudolf Höss and his life after the zone of interest for those people interested. But what did you make of the choice to do real life Nazis, and what did you make of the performances, in particular of our lead Nazis and fascists? We've obviously got very lucky with Sandra Hüller this year. She's obviously really stormed off with obviously this and Anatomy of Fall, and obviously Christian Friedel as Rudolf Höss. What did you make of their performances?
I thought the entire cast was excellent, to be honest. It's an interesting one because they have to play it a certain way, and you spend the entire film with this family, so you could end up feeling conflicted at times. It's, I guess it's part of the thing. Is they're at times they're presented as a normal family. They're just living in this house. It just so happens that they're Nazis, and the work that the husband and father is doing across the other side of the fence is some of the most horrific things that have ever happened in the world. I have to say that, for me, Sandra Hüller is probably, in this film, probably my most hated character that has appeared in a film over the last sort of a year, I think I would have to say. Just immediately from the off, when she receives a package at the door and she's trying on this her new fur coat and lipstick, and where that's come from, and she's just sort of really happy that she's got this designer fur coat. She's trying it on, and you're just like, you are just the worst person in the world. And it just gets even worse actually later on. Just when you think she might be able to turn it around, she might be maybe showing elements that she's a good wife, she's a good mother. The husband says, yeah, unfortunately my placement here is coming to an end. We're all being transferred. We have to go back to Berlin so I can work on the final solution there. And she's like, well, technically you're being transferred, aren't you? I'm not leaving. I've built this really nice house here. I enjoy living here. I've got a swimming pool in the garden out the back. I'm going to stay here with the kids. You can go to Berlin, do what you do, but I'm not leaving. And you're just like, oh my God. And, it's that sort of juxtaposed against the scene where her own mother comes to stay and sort of hang out with the children, spend a nice weekend with the family. But then she wakes up at night, sort of coughing, and sort of looks out the window and is basically horrified by, the stench of the fumes that's coming out of this death factory, essentially. And then she's disappeared the next day. It just really hammers home just how blinkered people are to it. The children might maybe not have been as aware, but certainly I got the feeling that Sandra Hüller's wife knew exactly what was going on, and yet chose to ignore it, but also didn't really care. I think, if anything, the husband was maybe slightly more conflicted. He's been tasked with this job, and certainly towards the end, I'm sure we'll talk about it, there does seem to be slight moments where he's unsure of the path that he's taking. But for me, Sandra Hüller, villain of the year. And I saw this film before I saw Anatomy of a Fall, and therefore there was this huge question about, in that film, is she innocent or guilty? Based on Zone of Interest, I'm pretty sure that she probably was guilty. So
yeah, it's so fascinating that in a film about Nazis, fascists, the worst people possibly on the planet, that she edges ahead. And it's a really interesting film. I loved it, how it was like, when I heard about what this film was, like, I was immediately like hoping it would commit really to the bit of like, I just wanted to really focus on this family, their woes, their experiences, and just that's the focus. Like, I never really want to see them step into Auschwitz themselves. I never want to see, perhaps like I think of, the wonderful film Son of Saul, where it's like, what's it like on the other side of that wall and so on,
Yeah,
like in such nitty
those
gritty.
stories have been told before. Clearly, you are in the minority compared to the letterbox reviews that have been coming out from the general public in America. Is finally seeing this film. The Oppenheimer crowd. Why didn't they show a scene of what happened to the Japanese? And it's just like it's not that story. It's the story of a family who just, it's the banality of evil. For me, is what this film is about, and it's done perfectly.
Yeah, I was the exact same because like I know what is happening on their side. The film is making us painfully aware with that incredible sound design, what is going on there the whole time. I wanted to see a film about a family trying to make something work in amongst the worst possible place on the planet. That's a fascinating film to explore, something I'm really interested in watching. And I'm perfectly educated and aware enough to know what's going on the other side, which just makes it all the more tense. And I really did like that because, like, as you're talking about it, where I'm like, that Hoss guy is like, he's an asshole, but like he is trying to make something work for his family here. There's an element of compromise. It is like really simple family drama, and they're the worst possible people. But it's amazing how much you get caught up in this family drama of like, oh God, like he's begging, he's trying. It's so mundane, day to day, and that's what grounds this film for me. Is that you get really caught up in their experiences, which I just thought was such a fascinating experience and so on, and it never ventured away from that. It challenges you as an audience to whether you find sympathy or not, but there's something to be said about just sitting with this family and going, okay, go along with the journey with them, and how do you balance it?
Yeah, it's the most conflicted you'll feel about a Nazi family since The Sound of Music. But no, I just want to sort of touch back on the sound design there, and I mean, I'm interested to see how the wider audience, because you said you went to see it on limited screening with the general public, about how it starts with about a 5-minute sequence of just sort of like a black and a red screen with nothing but ambient background noise. You can hear sort of the wind blowing, sort of leaves rustling, the sort of birds and stuff like that. And to begin with, you're like, I mean, as a projectionist, initially in like the first 30 seconds, you're like, is something wrong here? Is there something wrong with the camera? And then you're like, oh no, wait, I know what they're doing. I see what they're doing. And it is a masterstroke of sound design. And what they're doing is they're attuning you to the background noise. So when you then enter this house and this garden of this family, not only are you listening to their conversations and stuff, but your ears are trained to be able to pick up on all the noises that are happening outside of the house on the other side of the fence. So you can hear the odd scream, the odd cry, the odd gunshot. And that's what makes it even more horrifying that, knowing that this family have also tuned out that noise. They've lived there that long. They've been able to tune out and make themselves completely separate to what's the horrors that are going on. And yeah, I think that's why the sound design. Sound design is genius, and some of the best sound design I've heard ever. To be
I read a really good interview the other day where they were like, and I think you spoke about it, like this is a film that you kind of need to watch and experience in the cinema, and they spoke about how they've actually made a different audio cut, so make sure to differentiate between the two cuts that you watch on Letterboxd, where it's like for the home release, the background track will be louder because the sort of cinema helps kind of make that feel a bit louder, whereas at home it kind of needs to push up a little bit more further just so that you can experience it. So there's a different audio cut that's going to be coming. It'll be interesting to see how people, whether for people like us that experience it in the cinema, whether it will have that same experience. But I think one thing I found absolutely fascinating about the film, and it was one of the few things I knew going in, was this Big Brother aspect of it. And I'm curious to get what your thoughts were on it. And for those that didn't get to experience the film, I found there was a really interesting kind of talk with Sandra Huller where she spoke about the experience and how it was shot for those that were curious. And it was that essentially it was a Big Brother house that, and I'll quote this for a moment or two, but you could shoot simultaneously from gate in the garden into the house, through the kitchen, and all the way to the office, so you wouldn't have any problem with continuity or with light because everything fits together. It creates something very important for this work, which was a sense of surveillance. You're constantly looked at, and then of course, because we're German, there is a sense of judgment, which is interesting. The pressure was very uncomfortable but necessary. It creates a focus for the actors at the same time, because the camera never turns, so you can never relax. You only have each other, so you have to rely on each other so much and on yourself, because you can't hide anything. You're constantly centered on yourself. You're in this room and you know everyone watches you. It's very intimidating and really, really useful. And then she went into the kind of technical aspect where she was like, you never spend any time with light change, technical interruptions, makeup, nothing. We were alone in the house with a directing assistant who sometimes told us when they cut, sometimes when they didn't. There were 60 microphones in the house, so sometimes we had to communicate secretly when we had a problem, because we knew that they would use everything we do. Sometimes the camera would roll for 45 minutes. We never knew when the scene was over. The fact that you were alone with this creature around you, because it felt very much like a creature or a presence, was very special. I'm very curious to see if people will work in the same way in the future, because you cut out a lot of things you don't like about filmmaking, really. And it was an interesting one because it almost made me think of what was Sight and Sound's voted best ever film, which was shot in the exact same way. I got to watch it a couple weeks earlier, that Janine Dielman at 23, where it was like you just watch someone walk from the kitchen to the living room to the bathroom, and it's just shot in this very kind of clinical way, and it just again made you just feel really uncomfortable and very immersed in it. It didn't feel like you were watching a film. I was very surprised at the lack of Mika Levy's score as well, which I think has been reflected in probably her lack of an Oscar nomination, because I don't think it made the eligibility criteria in terms of how much music was used in the film.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing, because what it does is, I guess, it places you almost as another member of the family, I guess. If there were more elaborate tracking shots in cinematography, it would sort of place another sort of barrier, or sort of create more distance between yourself and this family. But by having it as these static shots, and just sort of following them around their day, it's almost, yeah, so it's almost like you're also sat at the dinner table with them, or you're in an armchair sitting across from Hoss in his office and stuff like that. It does place you in the center of the action, and it's very difficult for you to get away. So you're experiencing everything that they are, and I think that's what adds to the almost an element of complicity in the action as well. It's like you can't escape from this family, and you can't, you want to, given what's happening, but it's impossible for you to do that. So
yeah, it just so good. I mean, it seems to kind of build upon that, where I think a few weeks before I rewatched Sexy Beast, which feels like it couldn't have been further from what Jonathan Glazer evolved into, but it felt like it was a continuation of that style that we saw in Under the Skin, of under the kind of cameras, people being unaware that they were being filmed, etc. It's just such an immersive experience, really. It's terrifying, horrifying, but it's just, yeah, incredible.
Yeah, and I guess don't really want to use the term method acting, but I guess it would almost be more akin to almost like a theatre production or a stage production, where I guess the actors can never be off, like you say, they never were really sure when was being filmed and when the cuts were and whatever. So for the actors, they were having to live within these characters for huge amounts of time, and I can only imagine how difficult that must have been to sort of stay in that sort of mindset for so long as well. And I guess sort of added an extra layer to it.
It's an interesting one as well, because I think, again, it feels like it plays out this very kind of traditional family story until the end. So for those that haven't had the chance to watch Zone of Interest yet, feel free to switch off and come back down the line. But a very interesting ending that certainly left me wondering and reflecting afterwards. So for those that just need that reminder, Höss has been kind of transitioned to Berlin. He knows that he's off to sort of oversee the final solution. And as he leaves his Berlin office, he stops and his body starts physically wrenching on the sort of these stairs, but he's unable to vomit. And then we cut to sort of the present day in sort of Auschwitz, where it's this museum where we see the kind of the barricades, the old shoes, etc. And we were with that for a few minutes as cleaners and janitors go around their job. And then we cut back to Berlin and sort of Höss head continues on down the stairwell. So tell us, what did you make of that very, very surprising ending?
I mean, yeah, it sort of like took a lot of people's breath away. In the screening I was in, it was just like, a hard. He's like you say, he's like his body is physically reacting to not only the decision of the Nazis in general to do this, but also the fact that this responsibility has been placed on him, and he almost he's physically reacting to it, but he can't, like you say, he can't actually vomit. There's still something holding him back, and then it's like he looks down the corridor. It's like he thinks he sees something, and it sort of pulls back away from him, and then it cuts this really hard cut to the modern day Auschwitz, and just sort of a group of cleaners sort of going around making sure that the museum is ready to open for the day for people to come and reflect and find information about loved ones that they've lost in the past and stuff like that. And it's a really, really sort of powerful moment to make that switch. And to be honest, I was thinking, well, it's just going to go to the end credits now. It's made its point. But then to cut back again, and this is why Glazer is, been nominated for Best Director. He won Best Director at the London Critics Circle last night, along with Best Film for this. And to make that decision to then cut back to Höss, who then basically sort of goes, right, composes himself, and then carries on down the stairs, essentially like, well, I'm still going to do it, I feel physically sick about it, but knowing what's going to happen and still deciding to fall down that path is just an absolute gut punch of an end of a movie. And I think it makes the film better for it. It would have been a fantastic film anyway to have ended on that hard gut to Auschwitz, but to cut back to him in that moment and know that it's not changed anything. He's still going to go ahead, and we're still going to, he's still going to go. It's just incredibly, a genius move by Glazer for me, I think, and it's what makes the film even better.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've never been to Auschwitz, but I've always been curious to visit it. And it reminds you when you go to some of these museums where I think of like the 9/11 museum in America, where it's one of the best museums I've ever been to. But when you're walking around it, you're conscious of like the most horrific death and destruction took place here. And one thing that always sticks with me, it's not necessarily shoes, but I remembered walking through it, and there was a section that was just dedicated to golf balls, where the amount of golf balls that were found in the wreckage because they survived the pressure that went down on them, and you're just like, these are just remnants of people that were going around their day that were just wiped out in such cruel and horrific ways and so on. And there's an element sometimes of like, what is it like to work in these places? And well, very different types of people that are working in Auschwitz now and then and so on. It reminds you that it's still this weird place of work. And it also reminded me somewhat on, in a slightly more amusing way, was Curb Your Enthusiasm, where it ended in a sort of Jewish museum, and hapless Larry David splashed his shoes and so on, and needed to grab a pair of shoes, and grabbed a pair of Jewish shoes, and it was just like the most bizarre thing where like, this is definitely two interesting endings. That was the ending to a season. This is an ending to a film. It was just really fascinating, and one that they didn't need to make their point, but it was such a really interesting one. And just watching Höss descend, make the decision to literally walk into darkness step at a time and so on. And yeah, you're reminded of that. These are while we spend so much of these times just swimming around with people and going around on their horses and having family discussions and disputes. At the end of the day, these are horrific people as well, and it's again a testament to the immersive nature of cinema, that we can go on that experience and be exposed to these different feelings and thoughts on one of the most shocking families ever.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a difficult film to watch. Any film about the Holocaust is going to be a difficult film, but I think it's sensitively handled. It's a new perspective on events which everyone is completely familiar with. Yes, some people have. It feels like some people have sort of missed the point of, oh yeah, they're Nazis. Yeah, well, I don't need to spend 2 hours on Nazis and whatever. But it's everyone talks about the horrors of it, and you get experiences of the people who are in the camps and whatever. But it's just another chance to sort of see the mindset of the people who perpetrated this and how they were normal people, um, just in charge of one of the most horrific things which has ever happened. And I think this film, it's had a very sort of slow rollout. I think that's important. Wherever you think, yeah, when you go wide too fast, there's potential for some of that power to be lost. It's a film which is going to do very well on word of mouth and stuff like that, and it's a film which demands discussions. I know a friend in Italy who went to a screening of this over Holocaust Memorial Weekend, and they had they did took part in sort of post screening discussions and Q&As, and I think it's the right forum. Cinema can make a difference, and by showcasing films like this and getting people into cinema and talking about it, I think that's where change can happen. You see all the horrors happening in the world just now, and it's if people just sit by and do nothing and not take part in the discussion or try to change stuff, that's when these things are allowed to continue. And so yeah, that's why I think something like Zone of Interest is an incredibly important film, and I think it's great that it's being recognised for its power to do that. And I guess yeah, testament to A24 for once again taking a film which is very difficult to market, and I think they've done a fantastic job. It's how do you sell a movie like this, and I think they've managed to do it in the correct way.
And it's interesting as well when you compare the release in America to the UK. So this is one of the, I think this is the third A24 film that's ever been distributed by themselves in the UK after Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Whale. And there was criticism, I think, online, fair or not very fair, about a very slow rollout in America. People were very interested to see this film, but were not finding it coming to their cities, and were desperate to see it. Whereas it feels like for us, there was a lot of previews at Picture House Cinemas, Cineworld. It kind of got a big rollout in one real big go in sort of the traditional kind of prestige film release section. It feels like they've gone really big, and I think it's benefited from a pretty quiet spell in the cinemas just now. I mean, films like Wonka, for crying out loud, are still getting a big rollout, and so I think it seems to do well in the UK. And I think at the end of the day, I think it's very fair to say it was easy to criticize A24's very slow release of it in America, but how many times have they released films similar to this and it's just completely vanished, and because the audience wasn't really there for it? And as much as you want to see people online going, I want to see Zone of Interest, when I'm going to see it, they made the right decision and gamble to hope for Oscar nominations to then roll out in the cinemas, because how many films that are kind of Jonathan Glazer style art house films with a kind of limited budget, all in either German, Polish, or Yiddish, those aren't box office successes. Whereas you kind of strike lucky with the Oscar nominations, and now they roll out past week. It seems to be the wise idea, and probably worth the wait for them as it was for me here in the UK.
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of checking the UK, yeah, because it did have a wider release in the UK, but I think they picked the right week. I think in the US it started to roll out around about sort of Christmas time, but here they basically did previews over Holocaust Memorial Day, and yeah, it's just out this weekend. And yeah, I think they made the right choice because, obviously it can be a very crowded market in the US and in the UK. With a lot of the cinema, Oscar nominees sort of coming out at the same time. But it seems to have managed to hit the right sort of time in the market. And let me just change. No, this is last week's things. But yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of. You've got stuff like Oliver Strangers is doing really well and stuff, and Poor Things has done fantastic. So, audiences in the UK are going back to the cinemas, but they're also willing to take. It feels like they're willing to take a bit more of a risk at the moment, with Poor Things being an 18 rated film, it's still done very well and stuff like that. So, audiences are coming back for this type of film. And, Jonathan Glazer is British, but I don't think he's not a household name that is like Christopher Nolan, someone that would be able to sell, a movie based on his name alone. And I think it's the right film, which is hit at the right time, I think, for this one.
It's going to be interesting. So we'll obviously be back next week because Iron Claw finally arrives in cinemas here. And obviously that was a film that received a lot of Oscar buzz, but this is one for 2 months now. I feel like every single film I've seen at the cinema has had the Iron Claw trailer. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how audiences click with that one and finally being able to see this one, especially with a wrestling maniac like yourself.
Yes, no, it's I've already seen it. I was lucky enough to see it in the States when I went over to New York. And yeah, I was kind of familiar with the story, but I still wasn't prepared for how for some of the places it goes. But it is certainly not your typical wrestling movie. It's a family drama set in the world of wrestling, but still with enough wrestling nods for me to be able to geek out and go, okay, yeah, no, I know that, I know that. But certainly, it's probably just about as dramatic as the current things going on in the WWE with the return of Dwayne the Rock Johnson, looking to take on his cousin Roman Reigns for head of the table at the sacrifice of Cody Rhodes. But that's a whole other podcast. I'm sure I'd be able to do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing that, and I think we've as we wait for more films to kind of make their way over. I'm looking forward to. I've only got one episode left of The Curse to go, and I cannot wait to talk about that one with you. It has been a show that I've had to really pace myself to handle the awkwardness of it all. So it'll be interesting to see how you get on when you end up having to blitz at Dallas.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it sounds like a film which is very difficult to blitz, so I might have to start drip feeding now that they're all online. So yes, yeah, I've heard many things, and I still don't think I will be prepared for what I'm about to watch. So,
well, everyone be prepared because we'll be back next week to discuss the Iron Claw. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye.